Ladies and gentlemen, today, I'm not here to give you a normal speech. I'm here to shake the ground beneath the stories you've been told. Because something just happened, something powerful, something historic. Zohran Mamdani just did what Donald Trump never saw coming. And tonight, we're going to talk about courage, about truth, and about the moment when one man stood up, not for fame, not for applause, but for the people who refused to be silent. This is not a speech about two names. This is a speech about a shift, a spark, a reminder that no matter how big the stage is, the truth always finds its way to victory. So tighten your seatbelts, because what you are about to hear is not just a message, it's a movement. And this movement began the moment Zohran Mamdani did the one thing Trump never imagined. He changed the game. Let's begin. Zohran Mamdani exposed the truth Trump never prepared for, and the impact of that moment stretched far beyond a single political clash. It wasn't just about calling out a mistake or revealing a hidden fact. It was about standing in a space where very few dare to stand directly in front of power, and speaking a truth that power did not expect. Trump, known for his sharp comebacks, his dominance of media narratives, and his ability to turn any situation in his favor, had finally encountered something he couldn't deflect. That something was clarity. It was honesty. It was the kind of truth that cuts through noise like a blade through smoke. Zohran didn't raise his voice. He didn't need theatrics. What shook the ground was the simplicity and purity of what he exposed. For years, Trump built a wall around himself, not the physical one he talked about, but a wall of public confidence, public spectacle, public bravado. Many tried to break through it and failed. But Zohran Mamdani chose a completely different approach. Instead of going after Trump's personality, he went after the narrative. Instead of questioning Trump's style, he questioned the foundation of the stories Trump told the world. And once that foundation cracks, the whole structure begins to tremble. Trump never prepared for someone like Zohran, not because Zohran was louder or more powerful, but because he was precise, principled, and fearless. He didn't walk into the moment to win applause. He walked in to speak a truth that mattered. Zohran exposed something Trump couldn't counter, the reality of who is truly affected by political decisions. He turned the spotlight away from Trump's words and put it on the people whose lives were shaped by those words. He showcased the stories that Trump never addressed, the communities that were overlooked, the struggles that were buried under political slogans. And when those stories were spoken aloud with courage, they hit harder than any political attack ever could. They revealed a gap between the world Trump described and the world people were actually living in. That exposure wasn't just political, it was human. And Trump was never prepared for a truth rooted in humanity because his strategies were built on spectacle, not sincerity. Zohran brought sincerity into a battlefield dominated by theatrics, and for the first time, Trump didn't know how to respond. The more Zohran spoke, the more obvious it became that this wasn't a typical challenge or a staged confrontation. This was a mirror being held up, a mirror Trump had avoided for years. In that mirror, people could see what had been hidden, the consequences, the contradictions, and the reality behind the promises. The reaction from the public was immediate. People felt something they hadn't felt in a long time: clarity. Not confusion, not division, not fear. Clarity. Zohran gave them the truth in a way they could feel in their chest. And once people taste truth, they start questioning everything they were told before. Trump never saw that coming, because for the first time, he wasn't controlling the narrative. Someone else was someone who didn't want fame, who didn't want attention, someone who only wanted justice. Zohran exposed the one thing Trump feared most, the truth spoken by someone who had nothing to lose and everything to stand for. And when that truth landed, it didn't just shake a political figure, it shook the entire landscape. This was the moment the world realized that even the biggest voices can be quieted when confronted by honesty. And that honesty came from Zohran Mamdani. A bold move that shifted power back to the people is never just a moment. It becomes a spark that lights an entire movement. When Zohran Mamdani stepped forward with courage, he didn't do it for attention, applause, or personal gain. He did it because someone had to speak for those who had been ignored for too long. In a political world dominated by noise, ego, and showmanship, his decision to act brought the focus back to what truly matters: people, their struggles, their fears, and their dreams. And when one person dares to stand up, millions watching from the sidelines suddenly realize they can stand too. That is the real strength of a bold move. It reminds others of the power they have forgotten. For years, leadership had drifted away from serving the public. It became more about protecting images, defending power, and building narratives designed to distract rather than deliver. The gap between leaders and the people widened, and every promise seemed to fade into empty air. But Zohran's action changed the direction of that narrative. He made it clear that leadership should not be about control but about responsibility. Instead of speaking from a place of authority, he spoke from a place of solidarity. That shift alone was powerful enough to shake the system because it offered people something they had been craving, representation that feels real. Zohran didn't enter the moment as a politician fighting another politician. He entered as a human being standing with other human beings. He spoke the words many were too afraid to voice, and he stood firmly in a position that most avoided because it meant confronting powerful figures and their structures. His courage wasn't loud or aggressive. It was calm, steady, and rooted in truth. And that is exactly why it hit so deeply. In a time when fear was used as a tool, Zohran replaced fear with clarity. In a moment when people were told they were powerless, he reminded them that their voice still matters. That bold move became a turning point because it awakened something in the people, the belief that they weren't just spectators in a political game. They were the foundation. They were the ones with real influence. And when someone stands on their side instead of above them, a bridge forms, a bridge that connects leadership with the ones who need it most. This bridge is what Trump and many others never expected. For them, power was a top-down system, something held tightly, guarded, carefully, used strategically. But Zohran flipped that idea. He brought power back down to where it belonged, in the hands of the public. What made this moment truly transformational was that Zohran didn't simply challenge Trump. He challenged the mindset that allowed so many leaders to rise without accountability. He shattered the illusion that people must accept whatever they are given. He showed that courage from one individual can inspire courage in thousands. And once people begin to feel empowered, the balance of power shifts not from one leader to another, but from leaders back to society. People began to realize that change doesn't require permission. It requires conviction. It requires someone to say, "We deserve better," and to say it loudly enough that others join in. Zohran's bold move echoed across communities, across conversations, across every person who had been waiting for someone to remind them of their own strength. Power returned to the people not because it was handed to them, but because they recognized it was theirs all along. And that is how one moment, one voice, one courageous step became the beginning of a shift that no one, especially Trump, ever saw coming. Trump's dominance, shattered by unexpected moral courage, is not just a political statement. It is the story of what happens when truth confronts power, when conviction faces ego, and when integrity finally steps into a room where theatrics once ruled. For years, Trump maintained his dominance not only through influence and authority, but through the sheer force of confidence. His words shaped headlines, his presence shaped conversations, and his personality shaped the entire political landscape. Many challenged him, but very few ever managed to shake the ground beneath his feet. Yet what Trump never expected was that someone like Zohran Mamdani, someone grounded in moral clarity rather than performance, would become the one to break that dominance in a way he could not anticipate or defend against. Trump built a political identity around boldness, aggression, and the appearance of strength. He used fear as a tool, used division as a shield, and used unpredictability as a strategy. It worked for a long time because most people who confronted him either mirrored his aggression or backed away from it. But Zohran chose a completely different path. He didn't match Trump's volume. He didn't match Trump's theatrics. Instead, he spoke with a moral courage that came from a place Trump rarely encountered: sincerity. That sincerity was so powerful, so unexpected, that Trump's usual tactics simply had no effect. The moment Zohran stepped forward, he didn't look like a political opponent. He looked like a representative of the people who had been forgotten under the weight of political games. And when he spoke, his words carried the weight of real stories, real struggles, and real consequences. Trump, who was used to dealing with political opponents who cared more about popularity than truth, suddenly found himself facing someone who couldn't be intimidated or distracted. Zohran wasn't there to win an argument. He was there to deliver a message that came from the hearts of millions who felt unseen. What shattered Trump's dominance was not an attack, it was exposure. Exposure of the gap between the leader Trump portrayed himself to be and the reality people were facing. Exposure of promises left unfulfilled. Exposure of the vast difference between image and impact. Zohran's moral courage allowed him to speak truths that Trump had pushed aside for years. And this time, those truths were spoken so clearly, so boldly, and so fearlessly that they couldn't be twisted or buried. The more Zohran spoke, the more people began to feel something shifting. A sense that leadership could be honest again. That strength could come from compassion rather than intimidation. That courage could be quiet yet unshakable. This shift terrified Trump. For the first time, he wasn't up against someone trying to outshine him. He was up against someone trying to outserve him. That difference made all the difference. Trump's dominance wasn't built to withstand humility. It wasn't built to withstand truth delivered without anger. It wasn't built to withstand someone who refused to play by his rules. Zohran's courage became a mirror held up to Trump's leadership, and in that mirror, people saw the truth they had ignored for too long. They saw the cracks. They saw the flaws. They saw the distance between what they were promised and what they were living. And once people see the truth clearly, the spell of dominance begins to break. Trump felt that break, the slipping of control, the shifting of momentum, the rise of a voice he couldn't overshadow. That moment became more than a confrontation. It became a turning point. Zohran Mamdani proved that moral courage can be more powerful than political might. He proved that dominance built on fear is fragile. He proved that even the strongest image can fall when faced with an unshakable truth. And that truth came from a place Trump never understood: integrity. A new political force rising against old fear-based narratives is more than a change of leadership. It is a transformation of mindset, a shift in the emotional atmosphere of a society, and a signal that people are tired of being controlled by fear. For years, political power in many places has relied on a simple formula: scare people, divide them, and then present yourself as the only solution. Fear became a tool, a weapon, a strategy. It shaped elections, conversations, and even the way people viewed one another. But every era built on fear eventually meets a point where people stop running and start questioning. That moment arrived when Zohran Mamdani stepped forward with a message that did not echo fear, but completely rejected it. This new political force didn't rise because Zohran shouted louder or played the same games as the old powers. It rose because he did something far more radical. He spoke to people as human beings instead of instruments in a political strategy. He refused to use fear to gain support. Instead, he pointed to hope, to unity, to justice, and to the idea that leadership should empower people, not frighten them into obedience. In a political climate where fear had become normal, this approach felt refreshing, even shocking. People weren't used to a leader who didn't manipulate their anxieties. They weren't used to hearing a message that lifted them instead of dividing them. And that is exactly why this new force began to rise. The old fear-based narrative had been powerful because it was predictable. It created enemies, highlighted threats, and constantly reminded people that danger was everywhere. It kept them tense, defensive, and dependent. But Zohran's rise introduced a completely different emotional language. He talked about what people could build, not what they needed to hide from. He talked about how communities could grow stronger together, not how they should see each other as threats. His vision wasn't based on what people should fear, it was based on what they deserved. This new political force didn't just challenge Trump, it challenged the entire system that allowed fear to dominate politics. Trump represented a style of leadership built on confrontation, dramatization, and division. For him, fear wasn't just a tactic, it was the foundation of his influence. But when Zohran began to rise, he showed people a version of leadership that didn't require fear to function. He showed them that power can come from compassion, clarity, and courage. And when people start to believe in a different kind of leadership, the old one begins to break. The shift became visible when ordinary citizens who were once silent started speaking up. They weren't afraid anymore. They weren't easily manipulated by dramatic speeches or headlines designed to scare them. Instead, they were energized by the idea that they mattered, that their voice could actually shape the future. That kind of empowerment is dangerous to any leader who relies on fear. Trump and others like him thrive when people feel helpless, divided, and uncertain. But Zohran's approach made people feel confident, connected, and hopeful, and hope is the one emotion fear cannot defeat. As this new force grew, it didn't do so with grand slogans or emotional manipulation. It grew because it resonated with the truth people carried in their hearts. People were ready for change. They were ready for honesty. They were ready for leadership that didn't treat them like pawns, and Zohran became the symbol of that readiness. The rise of this new political force wasn't just a political event, it became a cultural awakening. People started rejecting fear, not just in politics, but in the way they viewed their neighbors, their communities, and their own potential. They started believing that progress doesn't come from threats, but from unity. And they understood that the old narratives, built on fear and division, could no longer control a society that finally remembered its strength. This is the force that Trump never saw coming. A movement built on hope, rising from the courage of ordinary people who refuse to be afraid anymore. The moment that proved truth can outrun influence began quietly, almost subtly, yet its impact shook far beyond the political stage. For years, influence, especially the kind built on showmanship, power, and media control, appeared unstoppable. Those who held influence controlled narratives, shaped opinions, and decided what people believed. Trump mastered this skill better than most. His dominance wasn't just political, it was cultural, emotional, and psychological. He created an image so large that many felt nothing could break through it. But influence, no matter how powerful, becomes fragile when confronted with an undeniable truth spoken with courage and authenticity. And that is exactly what Zohran Mamdani brought forward. Truth doesn't need a spotlight. It doesn't need loudness. It doesn't need theatrics. Its strength comes from its purity. When Zohran spoke, he didn't rely on crafted slogans or dramatic performances. His message came from lived reality, from the struggles of real people, and from a deep sense of responsibility that no amount of influence could overshadow. His words weren't meant to entertain, they were meant to awaken. And awakening, once it begins, is something influence cannot control. Trump's strategy often relied on shaping the public's perception before truth could reach them. Influence works best when people remain distracted, divided, or doubtful. But Zohran's truth cut through that fog, like light breaking through darkness. It reminded people of what they already knew but had been conditioned to ignore, that integrity still matters, that leadership should serve people, and that real strength comes from honesty, not intimidation. The moment this truth surfaced, something shifted. People didn't just hear Zohran, they felt him. The greatest threat to manufactured influence is genuine connection. Trump's influence was built on power dynamics, a leader above the people, commanding attention. Zohran's truth, on the other hand, placed him beside the people, sharing their concerns rather than weaponizing them. This difference made his message not just believable, but undeniable. His truth wasn't an attack. It was a reflection of broken promises, overlooked communities, and the silent suffering that had gone unnoticed for too long. Once people saw that reflection, Trump's influence began to crack. What made this moment powerful was that Zohran didn't seek to destroy Trump's influence. Instead, he illuminated something bigger than any one political figure, the strength of collective awareness. When people are aware, truly aware, no influencer, no authority, no powerful figure can control them. And this awareness grew rapidly as Zohran continued to speak truths that resonated with reality rather than rhetoric. People began to question what they had been told. They began to question who they trusted. They began to question why influence had been allowed to replace honesty for so long. Truth travels differently. Influence spreads fast, but truth sinks deep. Influence can gain followers, but truth earns believers. Influence can manipulate emotions, but truth reshapes perspectives. And in that moment, perspectives shifted in a way Trump never anticipated. The stories he built began to lose their grip. The confidence he projected began to seem hollow. Because once truth enters the public consciousness, influence loses its foundation. Zohran's message did not need massive platforms or aggressive promotions. It moved organically from person to person, heart to heart, because people recognized themselves in it. They saw their own challenges, hopes, and frustrations mirrored back with honesty. This authenticity created a wave stronger than any influence campaign. It wasn't controlled, it wasn't scripted. And it wasn't politically calculated. It was real. The moment truth outran influence was the moment people realized they didn't need a powerful figure to tell them what to believe. They could see clearly. They could choose courage over fear, clarity over confusion, and unity over division. And that realization was far more powerful than any influence Trump had ever controlled. This was the moment everything changed. The moment Zohran Mamdani proved that influence may dominate for a while, but truth, once spoken with courage, always wins the race. In the end, this moment is not just about Zohran Mamdani, and it is certainly not just about Donald Trump. This moment is about us, the people who refuse to stay silent, the people who refuse to bow to fear, the people who know that truth still has a place in this world, no matter how loud the noise becomes. Tonight, we walk through a story bigger than a headline, bigger than politics, bigger than any one leader. We witnessed how truth exposes illusion, how courage confronts power, and how hope rises even when fear tries to bury it. We saw that a single voice, armed with conviction, can challenge an entire system built on intimidation. And we discovered that the greatest strength any society can ever hold is not found in the hands of one man, but in the hearts of millions who dare to believe in something better. Zohran Mamdani didn't win because he was stronger. He didn't win because he was louder. He won because he stood with the people, and when people rise, no force in the world can stand against them. So let this be a reminder. Power can be borrowed, but truth is owned. Influence can fade, but integrity lasts. Fear can control, but only when hope falls asleep, and tonight, hope woke up again. This is not the end of a speech. This is the beginning of a movement. A movement where we choose unity over division, courage over comfort, justice over silence. And as we walk forward from here, remember this. When truth speaks, it does not whisper, it echoes. And that echo, your echo, will shape the future more than any headline, any politician, or any moment of chaos ever could. The world just witnessed what Trump never saw coming. But the real story begins now. With you, with your voice, with your courage. Thank you.